I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so everything was cardio queen, calories in, calories out, don't eat fat, don't eat this, don't eat that. And cardio was everything. If you want to get skinny, you do cardio. Don't lift weights, you're going to get bulky, which is completely opposite of what is true. We know this now. There's tons of studies on muscle building. Resistance training is so key in postmenopause because you have to teach your muscles that they need to go up in strength.
Have you made it past menopause, or are you going through it now? I'm Dr. Pat McShane, and on the Women's Healthspan Voices podcast, I'll guide you through the health challenges of the menopausal years and beyond, guiding the way to thriving in this powerful era of your womanhood. Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Pat McShane, and it's my great pleasure today to have as my guest Dr. Heidi Codino, who is a naturopathic doctor and practicing in a practice that's called Blossoming Longevity. And she and her partner, Dr. Serena, have their own podcast, which I highly recommend that you go check that one out as well. So welcome today, Dr. Heidi. You have a doctorate in naturopathy, which is a little bit different than an MD, and maybe you'll just say a word about that and a little bit about how you got to that place in your life to getting that degree. And then maybe we'll start talking about some specific topics that you think are most important for our senior women audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be here. So I struggled with my own hormonal issues. A lot of things kind of led up to it. And I had been constantly dismissed in conventional care because all of my lab values were kind of normal. And they were in the normal ranges, which, as you know, being in the world of medicine, they're not really based on our bodies. They're based on a broad as a whole. And so it doesn't always necessarily show the whole picture. So I finally found a naturopathic doctor through a friend of mine, and I didn't even know they existed until that point. And she was able to kind of figure out what was going on with me and run different tests that were a little bit further than what we would normally run in the beginning and figure out how to fix everything that was going on. I had a very hard emergency C-section that shut down my thyroid, but my TSH was technically normal. And so nobody ever went past that. So she was able to go past that. She actually looked into my hormones, the T3 and T4, and found that even though my TSH was in an okay level, my T3 and T4 were just tanked. And that's what was causing all of the issues. So it was subclinical hypothyroid is what they called it, just because everybody looks at TSH for the gold standard. So that kind of got me into liking the naturopathic realm. And then I learned a little bit more from her about it throughout the years of being her patient. And then I wanted to go back to school and do something more. So I went back to school with 4 kids because I'm crazy like that and became a naturopathic doctor because I wanted to be able to be the one to help heal other people when, the standards of care that a lot of times us as doctors have to stick to because of insurance criteria and all the other things that we have to deal with. I wanted to be able to help fix and find out what was really going on with people. And a lot of times we just don't have the time for that in conventional medicine. Now, naturopathic medical school, we learn everything that you do in conventional medicine as well. So we have to take boards, we have to do all those things. We learn all of the regular stuff, but then we have a couple of extra years where we're integrating all of the nutrition, all of the herbs, all of the supplements, everything like that, and pharmacology as well. So we have to learn how those all interact together. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's definitely done a service to myself and my family. And I wouldn't take it back for the world. I don't like all of my student loan debt for med school, but it definitely has gotten me to where I am. And I've been able to help a lot of other people this way. So it's been great.
As in most of the functional medicine disciplines, the idea here is to get to the cause of the problem, not just treat the symptoms. And I think that's quite a fundamental different view that is going to help a lot of people. And I imagine in your practice now, many of the women you see have been somehow just not well served by the conventional medical medical system. Is that what you would say as well?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not necessarily the doctors, right? It's not that the doctors are having this disservice, it's the whole system. So, especially in conventional medicine. So, Dr. Serena and I own our own practice, so we can make our own schedules. But in the conventional medical practice, when you go to big places like OHSU or Legacy or Peace Health or, something that's a bigger group, they have strict standards of you have 10 minutes with each patient and that's all you get. So they don't have time to even dig deeper. They have to just basically treat the symptoms, and they don't have the time to actually dive in and try to figure out what's going on. So it's not necessarily the conventional medical schools or anything like that. It's more of the fact that it's just the system and how it's kind of broken. And when you own your own practice or you're in naturopathic, you have a little bit more wiggle room because they expect you to be digging deeper. And I really like it because, it's fun to dig deep and try to figure out things.
Yes, yes. Especially when somebody comes in with a long list of tests that they've already had and treatments maybe, and detective work, I'm sure, goes on quite often in your
Yes.
practice. So maybe we could switch gears a little bit and you could tell us more about the kinds of issues that senior women bring to your practice, and basically just things that you have found that are neglected in their worldview or the way that they have been treated so far in the medical system, but before they get to you. And we'll talk a little bit about hormones in there too, especially in the light of the recent changes in the hormone labeling from the FDA. So I've left you a broad range of things to talk about.
Yeah. So, okay. So we get a lot of women who recently, it's hopefully going to start changing because, like you said, the myths about hormone replacement therapy has finally been debunked and they're taking off the black box warnings. With that being said, there are still, there are risks and there are things that you have to consider per person. It's very individualized. But we get a lot of people who have been suffering, a lot of women who have gone post menopause, who, went through perimenopause, suffered through it, went through menopause, that one day of not having a period for a year. Technically, menopause is just one day. And then post menopause, where they're still suffering. They have no energy. Their hair is falling out. They've gained all this weight. They have no muscle mass anymore. And they just don't feel like themselves. They have raging anxiety. They have heart palpitations. They think something's wrong with their body all the time. Their joints hurt. They can't do things. They've started to have, bone loss, all these things. And, to be honest, if we hadn't had the research that it has been kind of not necessarily debunked, but has been broken apart to show that it wasn't done very well or as well as we thought it was, and known that all these hormones were actually pretty safe in most women, I don't think they would have had to suffer as long as they have. And in the conventional medical system, like I said, especially when you're in these big practices, they have algorithms that you have to follow because the FDA warnings were on it. And there was all of these little algorithms that they had to follow. They weren't giving people hormones, even if they were, if they were 10 years past menopause, or if they, their mom had breast cancer and it had nothing to do with hormones, they wouldn't do it because they were just too afraid, because in their system, if they made a mistake like that, they would be fired or they'd lose their license or anything, which, if they were making a mistake that was actually going to hurt somebody, that's a huge difference. Obviously, we would want them to be punished for that, or
indeed.
lose their license so that they don't do it again. But the problem is that starting hormones earlier can actually help these women go through all these things and not lose as much muscle and not have the frailty and not lose as much bone mass. So if we can get them and help them through these things and just making them feel like themselves, I don't know. I know you've been through it too. And I'm in perimenopause technically, but I'm still feeling it. And before I went on hormone therapy, I was all over the place. I did not feel like myself. I looked in the mirror and I was like, who the hell are you? I have no idea what's going on. And it wasn't just how I looked, right? It wasn't just aesthetics. It was just, I did not feel like myself. And it's not talked about enough. And a lot of my symptoms were not the normal symptoms that people think of for menopause and perimenopause, the hot flashes or the fatigue. I did have the fatigue. I had some flashes, but not a lot. Most of my stuff was palpitations, dizziness, panic attacks that would come out of nowhere, and I'd never had them before. massive anxiety, complete apathy for anything. I didn't want to get out of bed sometimes. And I've had depression here or there, but I've never really struggled with deep depression where I didn't want to get out of bed. I had no motivation. I had all of these things that, even in med school, we were taught about some of this stuff, but I feel like we were not really taught how much it actually affects.
Yeah. The full
Yeah.
range. I mean, sleep is a huge one. That was the one that in
Yeah.
retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sleep. Progesterone is our get to sleep hormone. If you can't
Yep.
get to sleep, your progesterone's probably a little low because it is a sister to melatonin. And then you've also got estrogen, which is your stay asleep hormone. And that is the one that really messed me up because I'd always had trouble falling asleep. But man, when my estrogen dipped and I would wake up at 1, 2 a.m. and I was just wide awake and never could fall back asleep, that really started things spiraling. So I think having all these symptoms and then nobody, like I had even gone to the emergency room because I thought I was having a heart attack or something was going on. I have a lot of heart issues in my family, and I had gone to cardiologists and not one of them had suggested that maybe it was perimenopause that was causing the palpitations, the weakness, the all of a sudden like panic attacks where I thought I was going to pass out. Not one. And then finally I sat down with Dr. Serena, who is my business partner. I was like, what the hell is going on? Like I wore a Holter monitor. Nothing was actually wrong with my heart. And we figured out that it was perimenopause. So I started on low dose hormones and we've adjusted, as I go through my journey of perimenopause, you have to kind of adjust your dosing. And it's been great ever since. I feel like myself again. I'm able to move, and I see this so much in the women that come to this. Yes.
Another system problem is that there's no training on this in medical school to get an MD.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's different in naturopathic medical school, but again, it's hard to blame the docs when they just haven't been trained. And even gynecologists will say that they don't feel confident about treating perimenopause and menopause. And then postmenopause is a whole other story because the data really haven't been there so much about what's the right thing to do for we postmenopausal women. Maybe we could transition over to that side of things. And in our previous discussions, we talked a lot about muscle mass and activity as being things that are not thought of often enough in women who are trying to stay healthy in their postmenopause.
Yeah. Well, and muscle is incredibly important. And I think it's not given enough credit because muscle isn't just like about tone or power. It's a vital organ for your metabolism, your hormones, your brain. Healthy muscle helps regulate blood sugar, supports bone strength, keeps hormones balanced. Even after menopause, maintaining muscle becomes even more important because as the estrogen levels drop, women naturally lose muscle faster. It doesn't just affect strength though. It is linked to slower metabolism, the weaker bones, and even changes in brain health. We have a ton of estrogen receptors in our brain. And people don't remember that when we're talking about like one of the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause is brain fog. And that's because we're not feeding the receptors in our brain. Studies have shown that if you have lower muscle mass after menopause, you're up to 5 times more likely to experience cognitive decline or dementia. And that's mostly because the active muscles in your muscles are active. They release BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor. These help keep your brain sharp, your mood balanced, and your blood vessels are all healthy so that it maintains cardiovascular health and brain health, which, as we know, brain health and cardiovascular health, dementia comes from that not being healthy. And so with using your muscles to actually support these compounds, you're helping your brain and your blood vessels.
Let's talk a little bit about resistance training versus what we call cardio or aerobic, or I just call movement and activity.
Yeah. Okay. So especially in postmenopause, right? You've already lost a lot of muscle strength. especially if you haven't been able to be on hormone therapy. You've lost a lot of muscle sarcopenia. That's just muscle loss. And it's because you've got, your estrogen and your testosterone and your progesterone are all coming down, which is normal. But we need to make sure that we are building muscle back. So you can continue to maintain your levels and build muscle back even post-menopause. And it's even more important post-menopause, right? Because that's when osteopenia and osteoporosis come along, and muscles support that. So the biggest thing is resistance training. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So everything was cardio queen, calories in, calories out, don't eat fat, don't eat this, don't eat that. And cardio was everything. If you want to get skinny, you do cardio. Don't lift weights, you're going to get bulky, which is completely opposite of what is true. We know this now. There's tons of studies on muscle building. Resistance training is so key in postmenopause because you have to teach your muscles that they need to go up in strength. So building muscle post-menopause is already harder, right? We don't have the hormones to do it unless you have hormones on board, but you still have to work harder. So resistance training is going to be the biggest thing that you need to do for your muscles. And you want to keep your muscles strong for your skeleton. So strength training, especially heavy lifting. I know everybody looks at me crazy when I say that. You're not going to get huge. You're not going to become like, The Rock or one of those muscly guys at the gym. You're getting lean muscle. You actually have to lift heavy. I have regimens that I set out for all of my patients because women especially don't know how to lift heavy. Not all of them, but a lot don't, because we've always been told cardio, cardio, cardio. Lift, lift some little 5-pound weights and you'll be fine. That'll give you long, lean muscle. And I'm like, well, you got to build muscle. And to build muscle, you really need weight. But cardio is great too. I love cardio. You got to move your body. But to keep your muscle mass and to keep your bone health strong, you really need to lift heavy weights.
A couple other things I would add to that, which is that you can increase muscle mass at any age, even if you're 80 years old. They've done these studies looking at people in, even in senior living kinds of situations. And even if you're starting from zero, you do see an increase in your muscle mass and the downstream good things that come from that. If you're eating enough protein, and that's the other piece of this, and I'll say another word about that in a moment, and doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
The protein piece, even the amount of protein that worked for us in our 30s and 40s, is often not enough because we have what's called anabolic resistance, which is our body's sometimes absorption and metabolism of protein is an issue as well, but mostly we just don't take it into ourselves the same way that we did when we were in our 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Right.
So we have to be super careful about how much protein we eat.
Right. And there is good protein too, right? So you want to have good high quality protein because those are going to be a lot more absorbable than just, a lot of processed stuff. Protein is huge. Protein is so huge, and people often don't do it, especially, in our American food system. When we have the standard American diet, it is mostly carbs, and it's not even good, healthy carbs, generally speaking. It's, sugar and processed foods and ultra processed foods. And that is not going to help you build muscle. You can do as much work as you want in the gym, but if you're not fueling your body correctly, you're not going to build anything, or just maybe a little bit, but not enough for your whole body. What I recommend for my patients and what I do for myself is I do recommend 120 to 140 grams per day, depending on the person, right? Everybody's different. If they have kidney issues or liver issues or, gut issues, we work around all of that. But generally speaking, about 120 to 140 grams per day. Now, everybody looks at me like I'm crazy. I don't know how to get that much in. I can't do it. I'm vegetarian and I get that much in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do it, and you can do it with good quality. I also take digestive enzymes because, like you said, as we get older, we don't metabolize it as well and we don't absorb it as well. So I take a good quality digestive enzyme to help me break down the protein so that I do absorb more of it. And that really helps to it helps with digestion, but also it helps for you to absorb what you're eating. So you're not eating all this extra and then it still is going to waste.
That's great. That's great advice. Could you give us a word about starting from zero, let's say with resistance training? Maybe we drank the Kool-Aid and we've been doing, aerobic kinds of stuff, but not resistance. And it is a little off-putting, as you said, because we've been told this message about cardio,
Yep.
cardio, cardio. So how would you advise our listeners to get started if they are a person in this situation?
So what I would highly recommend getting a personal trainer if you can afford it. If you can
Yeah.
afford a personal trainer, get
Yep.
one. But please make sure that they are trained in postmenopausal women.
Yep.
There is a huge difference on how you have to do things. You have to protect your joints. It's a lot different than some 20-year-old guy that just wants to build his chest up.
Yep.
So if you can do that. If you can't, I highly suggest going to a gym that has machines. Machines are going to be a little bit safer for you if you've never done any weightlifting. So, for instance, I go to Planet Fitness. It's cheap, but it has all of the machines that I can use. And when I was starting out again from scratch, I used those at a lesser weight so that I could get my body used to it. And then now that I know form and I can actually activate the muscles correctly, I do heavier weights. When you're
You,
first starting, you need to make sure that you're being safe. So if you can do it at the gym and you can use these machines, and you can even ask the front desk people, hey, where's all the leg machines? Where's all the arm machines? You can use those safely, and you're going to need to try out what you can lift. What I tell my people is I want them to go 4 days a week. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's actually really good for your body. And it guarantees me that they're actually going to be moving at least 4 days a week. I do want them to do cardio, and I tell them to do cardio also. But for the muscle training, I break it down into sections. I do a leg day, which is my absolute favorite day because I feel my most powerful that day. I love it. That is glutes, quads, hamstrings, calves, adductors, abductors. Like I said, the gyms will have all of these machines usually, but that is your leg day. And the reason I break it down into just those is because if you can do enough exercises on those in like 45 minutes to an hour, you're going to be able to build muscle instead of just doing your whole body in there. You're not really focusing on those specific muscles, and you might not be building as much as you could if you were only focusing on certain things. I always have people do opposing muscles. So when you do your quadriceps, you do your hamstrings. You always want to do opposing muscles so that when you contract one, you are stretching the other. And you
Yep.
don't want to be lopsided.
Yep. You do core, then you have to do back and between your shoulder blades. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yes. And I always explain that to my people too, as like core. When I say it's core day, that means front and back core. Because the core is the whole wraparound. It's not just the front abs that like we always think about. That's another one of the days is core day. And then another day is biceps, triceps, and shoulders. So again, opposing muscles, you've got your bicep, you've got your tricep, and then you've got your shoulders, and you can do all of your shoulders. There's machines for all these things. There's free weights if you know what you're doing. And then the other day is chest and back and upper back. I love chest and back day too, because it also makes me feel powerful because, at our gym, there's one it's a pull-up machine, and I can actually do pull-ups without assistance anymore. Only a couple of them, but that's been a huge thing for me because it's harder for women because of our muscle makeup. It's just harder. And so I finally gotten to the point where I can actually do it. So that's another
Congratulations. I would just say, even if you can't make 4 days a week for whatever reason, I think whatever you do is better than not doing it. And again, if you're just starting out, start
Exactly.
at 5 or 10 minutes and do it on your kitchen, island or the wall, if you can't do push-ups on the floor, start somewhere. And again, you can get a trainer for one session to teach you about the machines if the having a trainer on a regular basis is not in the budget or not in the schedule. So yeah, those are good goals to have. So you talk about future proofing for senior women. What else would you add besides muscle building and protein intake, as we talked about?
Yeah. So really, if you're going to future proof, you do need to do the strength training. You need to do cardio. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to do jazzercise 10 days a week, 10 times a week. You can do a nice, vigorous walk. You can do dancing. If you love dancing, go dancing. That's great cardio. You want to have fun. And dancing, if you're jumping around or moving and twisting, it actually helps with bone density too. Strength training helps with bone density. When you're postmenopausal, you're in that era, especially if you haven't had any hormones, then you're in that era of possibly having bone loss. And we want to make sure to future proof your health to make sure that you're not frail. You're not going to get that hip fracture and possibly die after that. You want to be able to go out and do things. You want to be able to go out, have fun with your friends. You want to go out and do things for yourself, like go grocery shopping yourself. People forget how important it is to feel independent. Functional independence is huge. And in menopause, if you're not doing strength training, eating correctly, drinking enough water, I know that sounds silly, having good, healthy food, not just the protein, but having a balanced diet rich in the protein, calcium, vitamin D, antioxidants, having a community and relationships also helps to future-proof you because that boosts oxytocin, which also plays off of getting your cortisol down. And when your cortisol down, your testosterone can rise and all these natural things can kind of balance back out. And we don't want to lose our independence. So future-proofing your health during menopause through the strength training, cultivating community, nutrient-rich diet with that extra protein so you can build the muscle. It really offers like a holistic approach that supports your physical, emotional, bone health, metabolic health, and overall mental health. Because when you are feeling frail and you have no independence, that's when things can really, really get down. And if you want to live healthy and live a lifespan and a health span, you really want it to be fun and you don't want to live miserably.
That's the whole idea. That's why we call this health span and not just lifespan, because we are typically living longer, but much of our longer life is spent, on a bunch of medications, going to a bunch of doctors, maybe with arthritis or mobility limitations. And I'm sure you see this in your practice as well. Mm-hmm. So that's what this whole series is all about, is trying to keep us as healthy as possible, young as late as possible, to quote one of my colleagues. So, this has been great information, and I plan, in future times to talk more about bone health, more about sleep. There's a lot of, certainly about dementia prevention, a lot of subjects that we covered very, very briefly today, but this has been a great introduction to basically a healthier lifestyle than a lot of us are accustomed to, and some tips about how to get started. One place to get started is if you're not happy with your conventional medical doctors, you might consider a functional medical practitioner, a naturopathic doctor, or somebody with just a different view of the whole person way of approaching your health span as you get older. So if this is the kind of information that you like, I hope you will subscribe and come back and see more of our videos. And otherwise, I hope you will share this information if you think it's good for your friends as well, and like us, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for being with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Heidi. It was great to have all of your insights today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks for listening to the Women's Healthspan Voices podcast. If today's episode spoke to you, follow the show and share it with a friend ready to take charge of her health. And please leave a review. It helps more women find us.